Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France, her name forever tied to the fall of the monarchy. Derisively nicknamed Madame Deficit by a public drowning in hardship and by enemies within her own court, she became a symbol of royal excess in a nation on the brink of collapse, an image that followed her to the guillotine. But was she truly the careless, extravagant queen history remembers, or simply a scapegoat in a country already falling apart? Born on November 2nd, 1755 at Vienna's Hofburg Palace, Maria Antonia Johanna was the 15th and penultimate child of Empress Maria Theresa and Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Marie's childhood was both idyllic and luxurious, as she and her family divided their time among 3 extravagant residences in Austria. The young princess had a knack for singing and dancing. She also enjoyed riding in the summer and tobogganing in the winter. However, she showed little interest in academics. To her mother, she was a sweet and affectionate child, charming certainly, but not especially remarkable. As Marie entered her teenage years, she didn't become any less frivolous. Yet her unparalleled charm and grace made her stand out. These qualities would serve her well in the diplomatic game aristocratic girls were expected to play, securing a tightly knit web of alliances across Europe. At just 14 years old, Marie became a pawn in one of Europe's most critical political alliances. In an effort to ease tensions between Austria and France, she was sent far from home to marry the heir to the French throne, the future Louis XVI. Before her departure, Maria Theresa offered a final piece of guidance: to be kind to the French people, as though she were an angel sent to them. Sadly, Marie would never fully live up to her mother's hopes. The young princess married Louis on May 16, 1770. Their wedding took place at the opulent Palace of Versailles, where she adopted the French form of her name, becoming Marie Antoinette. 4 years later, her 19-year-old husband ascended the throne as Louis XVI of France, making her queen at just 18. The young king was quite reserved, indecisive, and painfully shy, initially showing little interest in his beautiful bride. Although it was essential for the couple to produce a legitimate heir, the act of sexual intercourse seemed to make him deeply uncomfortable. It took 7 years for the marriage to be consummated. Once it was, however, Marie Antoinette gave birth to 4 children, though only one, Marie-Thérèse, would reach adulthood. Historians believe the king may have suffered from phimosis, a condition that likely caused both physical pain and emotional hesitation. During those early years, while the marriage remained unfulfilled, Marie endured growing frustration and loneliness. At first, she tried to support and encourage her husband, but as time passed and nothing changed, she began seeking comfort elsewhere. The young queen immersed herself in the dazzling social life of the court, attending lavish parties, gambling and indulging in extravagant fashions and costly personal projects. Though such excesses were common among royalty, they gradually shaped her negative public image and distanced her from the very people she was meant to charm. Louis never denied his wife anything, and in many ways enabled her pleasures just as she indulged his. It would not be long before the king's indecisiveness and the queen's extravagance led to trouble. While Marie had certainly been raised to obey the rigid rules of Versailles, they sometimes proved too restrictive for the fun-loving queen. Her father, who had died when she was 9, had held a merely ceremonial position at court and preferred spending time with his family in a relaxed environment free from formalities. However, at the highly regimented French court, formalities were ever present, leaving Marie Antoinette longing for an escape. She found the ultimate refuge in 1774, when Louis gifted her the Petit Trianon. She transformed the Petit Trianon and its surrounding gardens into a private retreat that reflected her tastes and her desire for a simpler, pastoral lifestyle. She moved away from the rigid French formal garden, redesigning the grounds in the more naturalistic English style, which emphasized winding paths, irregularly shaped ponds, and picturesque landscapes. One of her most famous additions was the Queen's Hamlet, a model village constructed between 1783 and 1786, inspired by the idealized rustic life depicted in contemporary art and literature. The hamlet included thatched roof cottages, a working farm, a dairy, and various buildings where milkmaids, cheesemakers, and shepherds lived and worked. It allowed Marie Antoinette and her closest friends to experience a romanticized version of country life, while still enjoying the luxuries of the court. She also introduced flowing streams, stocked ponds and rolling meadows, creating an idyllic and serene atmosphere. These changes reflected a broader cultural movement in 18th century France that romanticized rural life as an escape from the rigid formalities of court society. However, as the Queen broke further from court etiquette and continued expanding her fantasy world, public opinion turned sharply against her. Many believed she squandered vast sums on frivolities and selfishly neglected her duties as a mother, wife, and queen. Her romanticized vision of the simple life aligned with the fashionable return to nature, yet it stood in stark contrast to the harsh realities faced by farmers across the French countryside, many of whom were losing their land. A decade earlier, unrest had already erupted in the so-called Flower War, a series of riots sparked by soaring bread prices. That turmoil helped lay the groundwork for the French Revolution, as bitter winters and dwindling grain supplies would soon ignite similar uprisings in Paris. Yet Marie Antoinette was not the only one failing in her role. Louis XVI was steadily losing control of the nation's finances. He had committed funds and troops to support the American Revolution in an effort to weaken England's power, even as France itself sank deeper into debt. Yet despite Louis's economic missteps, Marie Antoinette bore the brunt of public outrage. Many courtiers argued that the vast sums spent on the Petit Trianon would have been far better used to ease the suffering of the poor, and the Queen soon earned the biting nickname Madame Deficit. Still, she remained largely unaware of the slow poison eroding the monarchy's image, until underground cartoons and illicit pamphlets began circulating from across Europe. These publications depicted her in scandalous and compromising situations with both men and women. The king and his censors proved powerless to contain their spread, and the images quickly found a receptive audience, eager to believe their queen immoral, licentious, and corrupt. After all, what was she doing hidden away in the charming Petit Trianon? How could such a vibrant young woman remain faithful to a husband so lacking in vigour? And why was the king permitted to visit only at her invitation? By 1785, her reputation had been so thoroughly dragged through the mud that the infamous affair of the diamond necklace delivered a devastating blow. Though the elaborate scheme had been carried out without her knowledge, relentless propaganda had already done its work. Few were willing to believe in her innocence. Marie Antoinette had become the perfect scapegoat, blamed for France's mounting crises and the focal point of a nation's growing anger. The Queen retaliated in 1787 by asking Elizabeth Louise Vigée to paint a family portrait, subtly echoing the triangular composition of Renaissance depictions of the Holy Family. Elizabeth, a gifted portraitist who enjoyed the Queen's patronage, had already painted no fewer than 30 portraits of Marie Antoinette and her family. This time, however, both artist and Queen chose to abandon the usual display of opulence. Marie Antoinette was portrayed in simple attire, wearing only modest earrings, her neck left deliberately bare. The message was clear. Her true wealth lay not in jewels or luxury, but in her children. Yet, however skillful this piece of propaganda may have been, it did little to quell the growing unrest or restore her damaged reputation. By now, Marie was painfully aware of the danger she faced. She put an end to her lavish parties and attempted to take a more active role in politics, while Louis seemed increasingly overwhelmed by mounting pressure. Antoinette even attended a council meeting in an effort to help calm public anger and address the deepening financial crisis. But to many it was too little, too late. She had long shown little interest in governance or in the suffering of her people, and when she finally acted, she struggled to do so decisively. Worse still, her efforts often backfired. By this stage, no matter what the Queen did, it was met with suspicion and hostility. The forces that fueled the French Revolution had been building for decades, but 1789 proved to be a transformative and ominous year for the monarchy. In an attempt to address France's dire financial crisis, Louis XVI summoned the Estates General, bringing together the three estates of the realm, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, yet he could not have foreseen how events would unfold. The Third Estate soon broke away, forming the National Assembly and demanding a constitutional monarchy. While Louis hesitated, paralysed by his characteristic indecisiveness, Marie Antoinette remained firmly opposed to any such reforms. Under her influence, Louis ordered troops to position themselves between Versailles and Paris. Rather than restoring order, The move only inflamed tensions and strengthened revolutionary resolve. On July 14, 1789, just 2 months after the Estates General had convened, revolutionaries stormed the Bastille, a political prison that stood as a powerful symbol of royal authority. In the weeks that followed, the old feudal system was dismantled, the press was declared free, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen was proclaimed. Yet despite these sweeping changes, chaos persisted. Grain supplies ran dangerously low, and bread prices once again soared, pushing the people closer to desperation. Meanwhile, the royal family remained at Versailles, now little more than a symbol of an outdated and increasingly rejected system. On October 5th, an angry crowd of women gathered in Paris and marched on the palace, soon joined by men as their numbers swelled. They stormed the royal apartments, their cries for the Queen's head echoing through the halls, and demanded that the royal family leave Versailles. Faced with overwhelming force, Louis had no choice but to comply. The family was relocated to Paris and housed in the Tuileries Palace, a move that marked the beginning of the monarchy's slow but irreversible decline. During the early period of her captivity, Marie Antoinette once again turned her attention to the shifting political landscape. She sought to understand public opinion, inquired about the revolution, and communicated in code with foreign allies while searching for a way to free her family. After nearly 2 years in confinement, only one option seemed to remain: escape. On the night of June 20th, 1791, the royal family fled Paris under cover of darkness in a carriage. Yet just miles from safety, they were recognized, captured, and forcibly returned to the Tuileries Palace as jeering crowds lined the streets. The failed flight to Varennes dramatically intensified tensions. With the rise of the free press, hostile portrayals of Marie Antoinette spread more rapidly than ever. She was depicted not merely as immoral, but as something far more sinister: a serpent, a demon, an enemy who must never be allowed to regain power. She was also condemned as the Austrian, a foreign agent accused of conspiring against the French people. Louis, meanwhile, was frequently portrayed as weak and ineffectual, gluttonous, indecisive, and easily controlled. The failed escape only deepened revolutionary anger. On September 3rd, 1791, a new constitution was enacted, transforming France into a constitutional monarchy. Yet the revolutionaries were far from satisfied. Many now called for war, hoping to spread revolutionary ideals beyond France's borders. Their primary target was Austria, Marie Antoinette's homeland. In early 1792, Louis declared war. Ironically, the Queen welcomed the conflict as much as the revolutionaries did. She hoped it would bring foreign intervention and secure her family's survival. A desperate plan she attempted to hasten by secretly sending her relatives information on French tactics and troop movements. But no rescue would come. The war would continue long after her death, lasting more than 2 decades. By June 1792, the monarchy had been irreparably weakened. Revolutionary crowds forced their way into the palace, placed a Phrygian cap upon the king's head, and compelled him to toast the revolution. In that moment, whatever authority he had left seemed to vanish. Soon after, the royal family was moved once again, this time to a medieval fortress known as the Temple. On September 21st, 1792, the 1,000-year-old monarchy was officially abolished. Marie Antoinette and Louis were no longer sovereigns, but mere citizens of the newly declared French Republic. That same month, a guillotine was erected in Paris. This so-called humane method of execution would soon become the grim symbol of a revolution born in the name of liberty, fraternity, and equality. As war intensified and the threat of civil conflict loomed, mobs once again flooded the streets. In the chaos, a brutal massacre of suspected royalists unfolded. Among the victims was the Queen's close friend, the Princess de Lamballe, her head severed, placed on a pike, and displayed outside Antoinette's window. The royal family would not be spared. A few months later, Louis was put on trial, convicted and sentenced to death. In a further act of cruelty, the Queen's 8-year-old son, recognised by royalists as Louis XVII, was taken from her and imprisoned in a separate cell. The boy was beaten, neglected, and forced to sing revolutionary songs. He would never see his mother again and died of illness 2 years later. Stripped of nearly everything, Marie Antoinette was separated from her daughter, Marie-Thérèse, and transferred to the Conciergerie, a grim fortress along the Seine. There, she was confined to a damp, dimly lit cell, with only a small window piercing the thick stone walls. By this stage, France had grown increasingly unstable, with civil unrest continuing to spread. In an effort to defend the fragile republic, a revolutionary tribunal was established to prosecute enemies of the state. On October 14, 1793, Marie Antoinette was brought before it. The trial was little more than a formality, the final act in the destruction of a once powerful monarchy. The charges against her relied heavily on scandalous pamphlets and defamatory cartoons rather than credible evidence. Among the most shocking accusations was the false claim of an incestuous relationship with her own son. Her fate had already been decided. 2 days later, on October 16, 1793, she was executed by guillotine. Many depictions of her final moments survive, but one of the most striking is a quick sketch by the neoclassical artist Jacques-Louis David, a committed revolutionary who had voted for her execution. In his drawing, Antoinette appears far older than her 37 years. Her once famous hair, so often the height of fashion, peaks unevenly from beneath a plain bonnet. She wears a solemn expression, yet carries herself with quiet dignity, her head held high, her posture unbroken, even as she approaches the guillotine. Unlike the cruel caricatures that had long defined her public image, this portrayal reveals something more human, a woman who had lost everything, yet faced her death with unwavering resolve. The French Revolution gave rise to ideals that continue to shape the modern world. Yet, in its pursuit of liberty and equality, it also unleashed immense cruelty. Years of hunger, anger, and resentment had made the people vengeful, and in Marie Antoinette they found the perfect target. They had found the perfect scapegoat, someone to embody everything that was wrong with an unjust system. But it was not enough to simply bring that system to an end. They sought to exploit her ruined reputation for all it was worth. Yes, she had been frivolous, and had done little to improve the lives of her people, and indeed, the monarchy was no longer capable of providing the country with what it truly needed. But alongside its cries for liberty, the French Revolution also gave rise to tragedy of its own. In its brutal massacres and relentless pursuit of enemies, it slowly and mercilessly tore a mother and her family apart.